Hi, Brett Siegel, national NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points. And we really appreciate it again, Brett. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Friday.
Hey, Allen, how you doing, man?
We were just, Brett, I was ready to sit here out in Northern California, talk about Jim Harbaugh and the return of Trey Lance, and he looked good. All this stuff, the Kuminga stuff has finally cooled off. And then Sam Amick comes out with an article. And of course, a lot of this stuff is a bit past tense, but it shows that, maybe some of this is going on. Were you a bit surprised at some of the information that came out today from Sam Amick? I know you're very plugged in, but just from the standpoint of, I guess, Malik Monk and the Warriors even saying no to that?
Well, there are big questions about if there had actually been an offer, including Malik Monk or not. I mean, there was talk of it, they don't like the Devin Carter-Dario Saric deal. Could Monk possibly be involved? What would the new offer look like? And obviously Sam Amick, a colleague over at The Athletic, confirmed that there is an offer out there involving Malik Monk. We knew about the first-round pick. We had reported on that at Clutch Points that they had included a protected first-round pick in their offer of Saric and Devin Carter. And now obviously that offer has been upgraded to Monk and that protected first-round pick. But there still isn't any movement on the Jonathan Kuminga front. It's just kind of more details coming out about what is actually out there and kind of what the Warriors' options are at this point. But they've completely shut down sign and trade discussions, to my knowledge. There hasn't been any movement on the Suns front. I believe Sam Amick reported that. We've reported that at Clutch Points as well, that there is nothing that the Suns can offer that the Warriors would like, even if they included Ryan Dunn, which I want to make adamantly clear has not been included in any trade dialogue between the two sides, between the Suns and the Warriors. Even if Dunn's name was brought up, I'm told that that's just not an area that they want to explore. They don't want Grayson Allen or Royce O'Neal, and those are the two contracts that the Suns can send out to make a sign and trade for Jonathan Kuminga. So there's no movement on that front. So now that kind of leaves the Kings as the last man standing in a way of, could they get a deal done for Jonathan Kuminga this offseason? The Warriors have played hardball. They've insisted on wanting either Keon Ellis or Keegan Murray included in a trade package. The Kings have been insistent on that not happening. We'll kind of see what happens, because it does kind of seem like that the Kings offer is out there now, and it's up to the Warriors of whether or not they want to take it.
So, and how I think we're understanding this, Brett, is when you say, it's funny because you say they up the offer to Malik Monk. The problem is, because of the restrictions, even with the Kings upping their offer to make the money work, the Warriors would have to move off of somebody like a Buddy Hield or Moses Moody. So essentially, you go with the first package, Devin Carter, Dario Saric, and a first, and you only give up Jonathan Kuminga. But obviously, the Warriors aren't high on Devin Carter, on that package in general, but you don't have to give up anything else. Or you get a Malik Monk who you might be higher on. The only problem is now you have to give up two guys that are pretty darn productive, or one of two guys that have been pretty darn productive for you in Moses Moody or Buddy Hield. So that's really the holdup, right, Brad? Or I guess the two options that the Warriors have, and they don't necessarily like either one of them.
Yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. And when we say up the offer, it's just from a fan's perspective of what's actually been reported and what's out there of, hey, this offer seems like it's better than Devin Carter and Dario Saric. But these options have been on the table for these teams since the offseason started. I mean, the Warriors know what the Kings can offer, and they have it all listed out of different packages, whether it's Keegan Murray, Malik Monk, whatever. But the Kings, you're kind of limited at this point of really what you're able to give up, because you have DeMar DeRozan kind of sitting there. And we talked about it last week of, if you bring in Jonathan Kuminga, well, what does that mean for DeMar DeRozan? Because if you're bringing in Kuminga, you're promising him a starting role. You're promising him being kind of one of the faces of the franchise in a way where he's going to have the ball. He's going to be a featured part of your lineup. And if you have a team of DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Domantas Sabonis, automatically right there, those are your top three guys. And so Kuminga, it's now a lateral situation moving from Golden State to Sacramento, where you were promised this kind of role, but you're not going to get that kind of role if DeRozan's there. So it really is an interesting situation, and it does seem like all indications continue to point to Jonathan Kuminga wanting a fresh start. Basically, it just comes down to how lenient the Warriors are going to be, because since the start of the offseason, they made it very clear that they're not going to give him up for any value that they don't want. And so far, both the Kings, the Suns, any other team that has approached them has not offered the exact value that the Warriors want. If Kuminga does return on a qualifying offer, it's not the best scenario for the Dubs, but obviously they do view him as being a part of their roster still. They still have plans for him, whether that's for the first half of the season, the whole season, who knows, but they do have some plans for Jonathan Kuminga, and that's why they haven't been willing to give him up. The second part of what you talked about with the Moses Moody giving up him or Buddy Hield, I'm told that they don't want to give up Moses Moody at all. That doesn't seem like a path that they want to go down at this time, especially given their lack of wing depth. And it does seem like that they're holding out for something bigger. If they were to move Moses Moody, it's not something that they would do to dump Jonathan Kuminga, and whether or not they would do so for Buddy Hield, I kind of lean in the direction that they wouldn't do that either, just because of his relationship with Jimmy Butler and how well Buddy Hield did play for them last season.
Talking to Brett Siegel, Clutch Points, national NBA insider and reporter. I want to just confirm, and obviously nothing can be fully confirmed, Brett, but when an article like this comes out and a lot of it is past tense, how often does a team maybe change their mind, or the negotiations? I know they can start back up, but when something like this comes out and Amick gets this information, we had Slater and Shams with the information earlier. A lot of times, does that mean that something is pretty much done? Or do you think, Allen, this could, and obviously anything could happen, but Allen, this thing could turn back up in maybe a week and the Warriors possibly change their mind? But with information like this coming out, which is very past tense, this thing might be cooked.
I feel like that in a week and a half, we're going to have a lot more clarity on the situation of what road this is really going down, because we're still kind of at a crossroads of, well, is he going to take the qualifying offer? Is he going to take another offer from the Warriors? Is sign and trade completely off the table? So until that path is really chosen, it's hard to necessarily say where Jonathan Kuminga will be playing to begin the 25-26 season. But I do expect maybe not a full resolution, but maybe a part resolution in the middle of August. As far as teams engaging and news coming out, it's all just leverage play at this point. It's the team and the player both trying to create leverage over each other in a situation that's not only turned toxic, but one in which neither side necessarily has full leverage over each other, because the Warriors, while they do have the majority of the leverage, like we've talked about, leverage, because Jonathan Kuminga can just accept his qualifying offer, and that kind of dooms both sides in a sense, where the Warriors wouldn't be able to trade him in a big deal at the trade deadline. It would be under his jurisdiction, given that he gets a no trade clause. And then from Kuminga's point of view, you're losing out on $35 million that you could have taken to bet on yourself, hope that money's there next year. And the biggest caveat is you're going to hope that you don't get injured, because we've seen it countless times where guys accept a qualifying offer, they either have it down year or they get hurt. Right? And the one that comes to mind is Nerlens Noel, when he took his qualifying offer years ago and turned down, I believe it was like $30 or $25 million.
Right.
And he didn't even make that kind of money for the rest of his career. So it's definitely a risk to take that QO. Whether or not Jonathan Kuminga does, right now, I still think that it's just bluff, and that him and his agent are trying to get the exact offer that they want from the Warriors, or just to push the narrative of a sign and trade, because he does not seem like he wants to be there. We'll see what happens. I do fully believe that we're going to get some more details from both parties over the course of the next 7 to 10 days.
Talking to Brett Siegel, national NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points. Brett, why exactly do you think the Warriors said no to the most recent offer? Do you think it was more about, I know Amick discussed the pick protection, but do you think it was more about the pick protection or the extra rotation player? I guess it could be a combination of both. Do you think if, say, this was December, right, and they were just matching money for a Malik Monk and they didn't have to give up a Buddy Hield, do you think even with those pick protections, they'd probably say yes? Is it because I looked at this and I thought, yeah, the problem is both, right? You can't get a low level first rounder and have to give up a rotation piece that has worked pretty good in your system so far.
It's definitely both. And when you mentioned this happening in December or January, close to the deadline, it's an interesting topic to discuss because if this was midseason, there's probably a lot more momentum to get a deal done because
Right.
it's a one-for-one player swap. You get that protected pick. And if you hold out longer, maybe the protections on the pick come down. And that's kind of where I'm at when I look at those first-round picks and knowing and understanding the avenue in which the Warriors front office is operating. They're going to want those protections either off completely or down to the fact where it would only be like a top 3, top 4 protected pick. But as far as the players are concerned, like I said, they don't want to give up Moses Moody. I find it hard to believe that they would want to give up Buddy Hield in this situation just to get off Jonathan Kuminga. And the big caveat here is you're going to have to find another team to take on one of those players because I don't think that the Kings would be able to make those salaries work, given that they're hard kept at the first apron. Their roster is basically filled at this time. And now not only are you talking about moving off of Malik Monk, but now you're going to have to move off of some of those other guys, whether it's a Devin Carter, whether it's a DeMar DeRozan. So now you're talking about getting a third or fourth team involved just from the Kings and the Warriors perspective. And that's much easier to figure out in a midseason trade than it is late in the offseason when teams have already put together their moves. They've already figured out whether or not they're hard capped. And most teams at this time aren't in a tanking mode, and they're not in a mode where they're just going to take on salary for the sake of doing so. Now, when you look at December or January, that's going to be a lot more easier to figure out, I would say. But I definitely think that this is something that would be a lot more adjustable at the trade deadline.
You said, with all that being said, Brett, you said, based on what I saw you post on X, on Twitter, that if you were the Warriors, you'd do the deal. Can you elaborate on that?
I feel like that at this point, you've lost Jonathan Kuminga, where even if you bring him back on a contract and you want him to play for those first 2 months of the season, what is that going to look like? You bring this guy into training camp, especially given some problems that you've had in the past with your veteran players dealing with your young players in training camp. And of course, we're talking about the Draymond Green, Jordan Poole situation. How is that going to go over if you know that you're bringing him back and he doesn't want to be there? How is Draymond going to feel about that? How is Steph and Jimmy going to feel about that? And you're basically creating a toxic environment for yourself and a very touchy subject that's going to be discussed pretty much every single week of the regular season up until the point that you actually trade him. Does it make somewhat sense to bring him back and trade him at the deadline for his full value amount and a bigger contract? Yes, it does from a front office perspective. But when you're talking about team personnel, the chemistry, and just your start of the regular season, I think it kind of dooms the Warriors in a way. And much like how we saw with the Warriors last season, they were put in a spot early on where they struggled at the start of the season after that hot start. And they pretty much put themselves in a position where they had to win every single game down the stretch to try to avoid the play-in tournament. They still ended up in that spot. And while they were one of the better teams in the league during the second half of the year, that doesn't make up for the fact that they still struggled. And I think that if you bring up Jonathan Kuminga and bring him back, you're going to be in a similar situation to that until you can actually make a trade to unload him. So from that point of view and that thinking, I believe it makes the most sense just to cut your losses now, get a good player in Malik Monk that you can maybe flip down the line. And if you can get the protections down on that 2030, 2031 pick, while it is a while out and it's still years away, it's the Sacramento Kings that we're talking about. And it seems like that they're kind of rebuilding or retooling every 3 to 4 years over the last decade. So when you look at it from that perspective, that has a chance of being a lottery pick.
Brett, could the Warriors on their end, as far as just how they're trying to resolve this with Jonathan Kuminga, could the Warriors waiver on their 2-year deal that they have out to Kuminga right now and either up that deal or remove the team option? Obviously, I think this is a big reason Kuminga is just sitting and waiting. Do you see them kind of budging on that 2-year deal specifically? And I think that's kind of what Kuminga is banking on.
I think that there's some stipulations, like you mentioned, in the deal that can be adjusted, whether it's the option. Obviously, that the no trade clause that he would get from it needs to be waived, and that's a starting point for the Warriors that they won't even renegotiate that. That has to be gone. The option, could there be a trade kicker? Will you up it to 3 years? I think those are details that you can still talk about, especially since Aaron Turner, Jonathan Kuminga's agent, came back and offered that 3-year deal to them. So I think that there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but in terms of the base compensation of that 2-year, $45 million deal, that's been in the ballpark for the last 2.5, 3 weeks from what I heard, even before Summer League, that they weren't going to exceed that $20 to $23 million range. That comes down to $22.5 million. So everything makes sense there. They're not going to move off of that kind of money. That is the money that they're offering Jonathan Kuminga. They're not going to increase it to say 25, 26, $27 million per season.
Mm-hmm.
If they do give him a third year, it's just going to be on top of what they've already offered. So now you're looking around, just doing the quick math in my head, I think it's around like $65, $70 million ish for 3 years. So can I see them changing their stipulations? Give it a very small percentage. Right now, Alan, I feel like that the Warriors are basically saying, here's our offer. You can take it and take the money and we can move you at the deadline, or you can go ahead and accept your qualifying offer and run the risk of losing out on all that money, run the risk of getting hurt. And I don't think either side really wants that qualifying offer. But at the end of the day, if that's the only thing on the table for Kuminga to maximize his value in quotes and in their mind, then I guess he would take it. But I just think that this is a big game of chicken and they're just calling each other's bluff, and whoever blinks first is going to wind up being the loser in the situation.
Brett Siegel, Clutch Points, national NBA insider and reporter. Brett, one more for you from the Kings' perspective. Does this feel like the hard stop moment for the Kings? Do you think from their perspective, they could be squeezed like we talked about, maybe a pick with less protections, just from the interest level, right? It started out at the Kings are just checking in on Jonathan Kuminga. They're still at the table. I think they kind of want to lock this down before he gets to any type of free agency, and they could get him at $21 million a year, and I think they like that as well. Do you see a world where they cave a little bit and maybe give a different pick that is unprotected? Or do you think this is the Kings, like you said, with the Warriors? Hey, it is what it is. Take it or leave it, and it's up to you to take that gamble. Do you think the Kings are at that same spot where they're saying this is what it is, we will walk away? Or just every time we think the Kings are out, they squeeze a little bit more? Do you think they're finally leaving the table like Shark Tank and saying they're out? Or do you think, all right, fine, we're this close, here's a pick with some version of less protections?
It certainly feels like this is the final variation of a trade that they'd be willing to do. Like we said, they're not going to give up Keon Ellis. They're not going to give up Keegan Murray. They've been off the table in these discussions. Malik Monk, whether or not the Warriors want him or not, I guess we'll find out. I've been told that they don't want to take back long-term contracts. He still has 2 more years after this season left. But when you look at the type of player that they need and scoring off their bench, it does make sense that Malik Monk could be a player that could do a lot of good for Golden State. Whether or not the Kings are willing to give up those protections on the pick, I don't believe that they will. I think that they could come down just slightly, maybe by 2, 3, 4 picks on that protection. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to make a pick that far out unprotected. Scott Perry in this front office isn't dumb. They know what they're doing, and they're not going to be taken advantage of in a situation of a player that doesn't even want to return to his team as a restricted free agent. So it does seem like this is the final variation of a trade, but my honest opinion, Alan, and given how far we've come, and some of it does contradict a lot of what's being said and what we've even reported, but I think that the most likely path is still Jonathan Kuminga signing that 2-year deal with the Warriors, returning and figuring this out before the trade deadline, simply because the Warriors just are not involving themselves in those sign and trade talks anymore. There's not a lot of value for them to get, and they can get much more at the trade deadline when teams are figuring out what exactly they want, when they see where teams are in the standings. And obviously, if Jonathan Kuminga is able to play and he plays up to the level that he was at the end of last season, that's only going to increase his value and incentivize more teams to trade for him. So I don't see a scenario in which the Warriors cave. I don't see a scenario in which another team is really going to cave, and that's kind of where we're at right now.
Brett Siegel, thank you so much for joining us on a Friday, man. Enjoy your weekend, and we will talk to you again soon. We really appreciate it, and thanks for all your good work, keeping us up to date on all things Jonathan Kuminga and the Kings. We will talk to you soon, my guy.
Sounds good, Alan. Thanks. I appreciate it.